So if you know me, you know that I love my float tanks, my sensory deprivation tanks. That's when you step into this like capsule filled with water, and when you get in it, you shut the door, it's pitch black. The water is heated to skin temperature, so you lose where the water breaks on your skin. And you can't see anything, you can't hear anything, you can't smell anything. They're taking all your senses away, and it is made such a crazy huge impact on my life. Not only is it a fantastic meditation practice, but it also is a nice relaxation process, and even helps with recovery with athletes. And my guest today has been one of the first people who brought it here to Syracuse and in Rochester. Many years ago, when I heard that he opened up in Rochester, I had always heard about sensory deprivation tanks, but I never had the opportunity to go until I took the drive out to Rochester to try out Bodymind Float Center. And it was such an awesome experience. I've been such a big fan of that company for a long time. And today I had the chance to interview the owner, David Brickman. It was so awesome getting to learn about him and how he got into float tanks and kind of how he runs his business. Because I'll tell you what, I have no idea where you start on building a float tank company. I mean, it's really really impressive what he's been doing. His facilities are always clean. Has a very friendly staff, and I can't say enough praise about the Bodymind Float Center here in Syracuse and in Rochester. And I just was just so blown away at how just down to earth and genuine David was throughout our whole conversation. It was a real pleasure and a real joy to talk to Dave, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did, because Dave was one of the coolest people. It was so cool getting to talk to him. I know I said that 5 times already, but I'll shut up now. Here is my new friend, David Brickman. So, Dave, I want to say thank you again for coming on the podcast, because for such a long time I've been doing a float, probably not as long or not as consistent as I probably should be. But for me, your place in Rochester was one of the first places that I got to go to and experience, and it's really awesome, from the physical to even the mental clarity I feel after I step out of the tank is fantastic. When I maybe we'll start with, how did float tanks get introduced to you?
Well, I had the privilege of floating for the first time in Portland, Oregon. I was there on business, and I got a couple of good buddies there. And Portland turns out to be kind of the mecca of floating, at least in the
Oh,
United States. I believe they have 4 float centers
whoa.
in the city there. And I floated at a place called Float On, and I was just taken with it right from the start. My 2 buddies and I came out of there feeling great, and I knew I wanted to float again. And I was pretty sure there wasn't anything like it in Rochester area where I live. So I called up my wife that night and I said, I think I want to open a float center. And bless her heart, she said, go for it.
Really? Was
Yeah.
it really that quick of a turnaround? Like, you stepped out of the tank and you were like, I want to open my own place.
Yeah. One of my buddies told me subsequently that he remembers my talking about it immediately.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. What was your first thoughts before you actually did it? Were you like nervous? Were you scared? Or were you just like pumped to try it?
I have to say I was kind of like, whatever, sure, man.
Yeah.
You say this is cool. Let's check it out. That's fine. But then you get there and you see the float tank, and it's if you've never done it before, it's novel, I guess, obviously, and that was exciting, and then yeah, I just got in the float tank, and I thought about my 2 buddies who were like 8 yards and 16 yards that way, also naked, parallel to me, the 3 of us, 3 naked guys floating 10 inches off the ground. It just cracked me up.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, and then I, got into the zone that almost everybody gets into during their floats, where you're just gone.
Did
And
it take you a while your first time to get settled in?
it didn't take me that long, as I recall. I have a long meditation background, and maybe that helps because the mind state that you get in when you're floating is the same as I think the same as a yogi or meditator's mind state. Maybe the thoughts start to quiet down a little bit. The brain starts producing theta brain waves. So I may have had like a little head start because of my meditation practice. Um,
Whoa.
but I just loved it. Felt great when I came out, and just wanted to do it some more.
Right, right. That's cool because like for me, my first time, uh, you float for, is it at the Bodymind Float Center? Is it an hour, hour and a half?
At Bodymind, we do 90-minute
90.
90-minute floats, which we inherited or took from Float On.
Yeah,
The thinking there is people. It seems like a long time for people who've never done it. They think they're going to be bored out of their minds, and it turns out when you get into this meditative mind state, as you know, the time really can zip by.
yeah,
And especially for first timers who may be a little bit nervous, who may be distracted by the novelty of it, who may be laughing at the whole odd circumstance. We want to make sure that newbies have ample time to really get to this place. Because, I mean, it's kind of cool and interesting to float in this simulated zero gravity setting. But the meat of the matter, the heart of the matter, is the relaxation response that kicks in. And the first time, as you are suggesting, it can take longer for people. And so 90 minutes is enough for almost everybody to get to that place. So they
right.
really are floating. It wouldn't serve our guests, and it wouldn't serve the business if people came out and said, "Oh, I floated." Yeah.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah, I would say like my first time, it probably took me just about half the time to get settled and get my bearings. And I definitely had a couple times where I was like, pop the lid open, make sure it wasn't locked a couple times. You kind of have that those secondary thoughts, or maybe it's
Yeah,
just your brain telling you you should move your body
sure.
right now. But it took me a little bit to get settled. And I remember when I had walked out of there for the first time, uh, Mike and I were just like, man, just like as the kids say, vibing. Like we were just like really relaxed and like
Still
very
floating.
calm, cool, very level headed, right?
Mhm.
And all I all I wanted was more of it after. I was like, when can we do that again? Like I want to do that again and again and again. Do you do that as a routine? Like do you do it like 3 times a week or
I'm really irregular about it. In part, it's just busyness.
yeah.
And yeah, I've actually. It's funny because I'm quite dedicated to a regular meditation practice, but my floating is really all over the place. I'll typically get into the float tank to deal with injuries or soreness. If my back is bothering me, or if I'm just really run down. I've burnt the candle at both ends. That's a time where I get to the float tank, but it's been highly irregular. There are many people, many of our members float with great regularity, once a month, up twice, 4 times a month.
Oh, interesting. I feel like the the more you do it, obviously, the easier you slip into it.
That's
And
right.
with your meditative practice, what the one that you're dedicated to, what does that look like?
Well, my background has been in Zen. There's a quite a important Zen center in Rochester, New York. So that's where I was trained. So that's the
Nice.
style of meditation that I have grown up on.
That's cool. Is that something that you do every morning or is it an every evening kind of thing?
Every morning. I think for me, it's great to just touch base with that first thing. I try to get an hour in, and then just it just gets my day started in the right
Oh,
way, and it's great to touch it again later on in the day if I can, and even throughout the day, just to come back to oneself, and uh, not get lost in the blizzard of activities and
yeah,
thought.
that's like one of the things I feel like I battle when I go into the flow tank where it's like the first like I just did it about a week ago And the first 20 minutes for me was very much like, bills, this appointment you have to do. You got to make sure you take care of this appointment after this and make sure you do this. And it's like, I'm always trying to bring my focus back to like my breath. Is
Yeah.
that kind of like the advice you would give to somebody new who doesn't have like a meditative practice going in?
Yeah. Following the breath, counting breaths. By following the breath, I just mean becoming just absorbed in the breathing, in the feeling of breathing. Following or paying attention to the breath is a great first practice. Just the act of breathing itself, it's just a natural way of self-calming. You'll often see someone has to speak publicly, or a performer, musician. If you watch them carefully, you may see before they get going, and I think it's instinctive, but it doesn't have to be instinctive. It could also be something that you've consciously decided to do. And so, yeah, I think counting breaths, counting exhalations, or just paying attention to the breath is a great way to calm oneself.
Uh, Keeping that train of thought with meditation, with there's like keeping it to your breath, right? And then there's a type of meditation that's like mantra based, right?
Mhm.
Like you have a saying of, was it like 2 3 sentences and you just repeat it back over and over again? Is that just, that's another form of it?
Yeah, Zen doesn't use mantras per se, but that is a very common and can be helpful way of meditating.
What is the difference between that kind of meditation and Zen meditation?
Well, I'm no expert in meditation, and certainly not in mantra meditation. In Zen meditation, well, in all true spiritual practice, I think you're you can get engaged in it simply to become more relaxed. Um, uh, but I think the ultimate spiritual goal is to know who you are, uh,
Right.
or to know who you are and to understand the nature of who you are. And so Zen in Zen, there's a system of koans, which are these questions that can't be answered with the rational mind, and you need
Oh,
a teacher to practice that. But there are different ways to get to this same result. I think all the great religions have a contemplative aspect. Uh, it's more or less prominent in different religions, but I think they all have a uh, that kind of a practice.
yeah, I'm very inexperienced when it comes to meditation. My only practice is literally in the flow tank. That's
Mhm.
it. That's it. Um so what kind of benefits do you see from floating?
Uh, well, I'll speak generally rather than for myself personally. I think we've been uh, discussing it already. I think the main reason people float is some kind of to reduce anxiety in their lives, and people are certainly feeling a lot of that these days. So that's the number one reason. I think people come to float is just to help themselves relax. We all long to be happy, and that's why people come to float, is they want to feel better, and that feeling better also extends to pain issues. Um, the heart of floating is the relaxation response, which I already mentioned, and from that there's a physiological reality to that response. The pulse is slowed, breathing slows, uh, your stress hormones are diminished. That you're not pumping out as many stress hormones, and you get a boost of endorphins, like the runner's high, pain fighting hormone. There's a pretty profound release of muscular spasm for most people, most commonly felt in the shoulders and the neck and the back. And so these physiological changes can help with pain. Often muscular spasm is a companion to pain, and can increase or exacerbate pain. So when muscle spasm releases, that helps people. And then the change in, the diminution of stress hormones and the boost of endorphins, that also changes the perception of pain. So stress is the number one reason. Pain is the number two reason. And then following that, people float for spiritual reasons, to help uh, amplify a meditation practice. A lot of athletes float to recover from workouts, to recover from injury. Um, I think those are the
Yeah.
top ones.
Yeah, that's like when people ask me, I always tell it's like the big three: mental, spiritual, and physical.
Yeah, that's a
Like,
nice way of
yeah,
nice
that's
way of saying it.
especially after I do a lot of martial arts, so like when I did it last Wednesday, it was the night before I did a hard workout, and then when I got there in the morning, I floated and I could just like my whole body was like still sore from last night, and I stepped out of the tank and I was like, oh look, I can stretch better, I can get things over my head and move a
Yeah.
little bit better, and I don't know, it just seems to I don't know, definitely is like a reset button for my mind almost.
Is there any mental or spiritual aspect to your martial arts training?
I guess you could say there is a form of meditation in when I do Brazilian jiu-jitsu, you're grappling with another human, right? And like in the moment, I'm trying to just kind of read their body energy. And if I get caught thinking about, like the bills that are due and this appointment that I have to get ready for and the showing I got to get situated and all this other stuff in my mind, that's when a mistake will happen. They catch me in something, I tap, and then I lost, we reset, and we start over again. It's almost like the same like in the float tank. Like your mind starts to kind of wander,
Mhm.
starts to drift away, and then you're like, no, hold on, bring it back to your breath. Just focus on your body's energy. So definitely kind of I get maybe it's like an active meditation for
Mhm.
sure. Uh and I also do Muay Thai, which is like like kickboxing. That isn't so much because I don't have this connection with like a constant physical connection when I'm doing something other than like kicking a pad or kicking or punching a focus mat. There's something about jujitsu and like the constant physical contact when you're grappling with somebody, I think that turns it for me into like a meditation. Um but I don't know. I guess I haven't really practiced it as such. Like I haven't practiced it like a meditation, you know. Um
Sounds like it's not an explicit part of the training, just something
yeah.
that you've discovered.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And at least for me, like I just notice I'm more confident and more comfortable when I'm just thinking about what I'm doing in the moment. Like oh, he's got my lapel, so I got to do this, then control his arm. Okay, he's starting to grab my sleeve. Let's start to suck that in a little bit. Like thinking about what's going on right then and there, rather than oh, I got a grocery shop after this, or I'm hungry. Where should I go and eat after this? That's when I fudge up and something happens.
Yep.
But it's definitely I guess I never saw the two parallels until now. So thank you. That's a good way to put the two together. Um, when somebody floats, like a lot of times people know that you have to like step into the chamber. If you're claustrophobic, what types of solutions are there for you?
Well, we of course hear about that a lot. I'd say that's probably the number one fear people have or anxiety people have about floating. So one thing that I often will tell people to calm them is just how common of a concern it is, but how rare it is for it to become an actual impediment to floating. Many people express they're afraid that they're going to be afraid, but it seldom comes to pass. Um, we mention to people that they're in control of the experience at all times. They get in the tank and when they want, they get out of the tank when they want. As you discovered, there's no lock on the
Yeah.
door. So there's no way anybody's going to lock you in there, and you're in your own private room, which you can lock. And then you can you can leave the door of the tank open if you want. You can prop it open partially. We'll, give you an extra towel to roll up. So people find their way. And then finally, for somebody who's really uncomfortable, we have in Syracuse 1 and in Rochester 2 open float pools, which, as the name suggests, have no enclosure. So there's no possibility of being claustrophobic in those. At least it has never happened yet. And the whole room essentially becomes like a giant float tank.
Oh, cool.
The same experience, the same air temperature and the same water temperature, which are about 95 degrees, the temperature of your skin, just as quiet, just as dark. And yeah, it's probably worth mentioning to people who are really unfamiliar with floating that this is the nature of the float environment, where we're trying to reduce all sensory stimulation. So water and air that are the same temperature as your skin and can't be felt, no sound, nothing to see, total darkness. If you shut off your dim light, which is probably the number 2 concern,
Yeah.
that is the dark. And then the water is about a quarter more dense than fresh water, like the Dead Sea. That's
How much salt goes into one of the tanks?
the solo tanks have 200 gallons of water and 800 pounds of salt.
Whoa.
So just a huge amount of salt goes.
Yeah.
We dumped 16 50-pound bags to
Wow.
prepare a float tank. Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah, it's a lot of salt in there, and that keeps you buoyant, and that's what's behind the simulated zero gravity feeling.
Right.
So you float with no effort, and what all this does is it just reduces stimulation to your brain. You're not getting sensory stimulation. You don't have to think about your body's position in gravity. You don't have to balance. You don't have to hold your head up because the water makes you so buoyant. So in this environment, your brain's got nothing to do, and this just promotes, almost induces a strong relaxation response.
Yeah, like where else do you turn off all of your senses, right? Like you could say, well, I can't see anything when I go to bed, but you can feel everything, right? You can feel the blanket, you can feel your position on the bed. Maybe you're feeling uncomfortable, so you move a little bit. But it's really wild. Like after the first adjustment period, you can't even tell where the water breaks on your skin.
Yeah, that's why the air and the water have to be the same temperature. And
Mm,
that happens quite naturally inside the enclosed tanks. In the open pools, we have to work a little harder at that, and we use infrared heating panels in the rooms to hit that
oh,
sweet spot.
oh, to keep it. Oh, so the water temperature is the same as the air. That's how you.
Yeah,
Okay, gotcha. That's very interesting because it's weird because like too like when you get in the tank, you don't feel the water breaks on your skin, and then you'll have a twitch, like your arm will like twitch, and then you're
yeah,
like, oh dang it, now I can feel the water, and I just got to settle back in for a
yeah. It
second.
always feels a little cool when you've been still and you move. Sometimes people say the water was cooling off, but it doesn't. Its temperature is maintained really quite precisely. It won't vary more than a half a degree at the most over the course
Right.
of the float. But for some reason, when you're still and for a while and then you move, it feels a little cool. I'm sure you've experienced that. And there's actually a name I learned for that little twitch. It's called a hypnagogic jerk. It's
Ah,
like where your leg kind of twitches when you're falling asleep. That's what
right.
that is. And yeah, and that happens to people in the float tank quite often.
They want to make sure that you're still there. It's like your brain being like, "Hey, is
Yeah.
your arm still there? Is it okay? Yeah, all right. You're good. You're good." Because you're motionless. Like you're not. Like you said, it's called a sensory deprivation tank. You're pulling away all your senses. You can't smell, hear, see, taste anything. It's just what a wild thing. When you were picking out the tanks for the locations, how did you decide on those tanks? Because there's a couple different models, right?
Yeah, we have, let's see, we've got 2 different kinds of open float pools, only one in Syracuse. And one of those had been a sort of the typical kind of pod style tank, not square, but pear shaped or clam shaped. And that used to have a lid, and we just took that off and put it in, turned it into an open pool. And
Oh,
then we have in Rochester, we have a very large enclosed tank, tall enough to stand in. And then in both locations, we have these more classic rectangular, boxy style solo float tanks. So one from a company called Samadhi, which is a Sanskrit word which means a clear mind. It's an
mhm.
appropriate name, I think. And
Yeah.
the other from a company called Escape Pod. And we just researched around. I say we, my wife Patty and I are partners in this venture. We traveled around. We tried different float tanks. We talked to people in the business, which has just flourished since we were investigating this a decade ago. There are probably 5 or 10 times as many places to
Yeah.
float in the country compared with a decade ago. So yeah, so we just saw what we liked, heard how the operators found them. Were they reliable? Were they easy to maintain? And the answer to those questions is always no. If they're probably the equivalent of a car from back in the 1930s or something like that. This is not a technology that's been perfected and mass produced for a century. So, but I have to say, though I don't consider myself to be somebody with a particularly great mechanical affinity, every problem that's come up,
uh, you guys are the ones who fix the units yourself.
there's no float tank repairman
Wow.
that you can
Right.
call. So when
Right.
something goes wrong, yeah, it's just your own uh, uh, ingenuity and cleverness. And there is really a strong, not only national, but there's an international community of a Facebook group.
Uh,
There are hundreds. I think there are a couple of thousand people in it, and many
Whoa.
of them own and operate float centers, or work or manage float centers. And yeah, so it's pretty rare to be the first person to have a particular problem. So you can go and there's an archive of old posts going back years. Why is my pump making this noise? And
Mm,
you know
right.
and in addition, just a lot of people who are just ready to share their wisdom and experience.
That is really refreshing to hear because I had listened to a podcast before of somebody who owned their own float company. Not only do they have their own facility, but they also like build the tanks, and he does like house calls and
Mhm.
fixes them and repairs them. I'm like, what an interesting niche business. I couldn't think of that even existing in Syracuse. So it's kind of cool to hear that you're like, well, we have a great community that we can outreach in case I have a hiccup with the Jets. I can call
Yeah.
and see a Facebook post that helps us work through it. Because
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, when it's float center helping another float center, I don't know. I always love to hear those kind of stories that people are actively helping each other.
Yeah, the whole float thing started in California. There was definitely a hippie kind of a vibe and an element to it. Um, when we were inventing our float center, uh, creating it, we thought, what do we want this to feel like when people come there? And we didn't want it to feel like a medical office, and we really didn't want to have beads and black lights, because there's some really sound science behind floating. It truly works. There's nothing mysterious about it. There's so so we so so yeah, we created this sort of look that we have, that was an attempt not to be either medical or hippy dippy. Um,
Yeah.
but
I think you
yeah,
guys found a good, like a perfect blend. Like that you guys found like not a blend. I would say probably like your own personality. I will also say that I've only been in two float tank centers. One of them being yours in Rochester, and the second of them being the one in Syracuse. So
uh,
I don't have a much to compare it to, but
well, they're pretty similar, and we
yeah, yeah, you guys have very the similar feel between the two of them.
yeah.
And I don't know if it was like a medical office that I was going into, like it probably would. I don't know. It probably would have a different feel to it. This just feels. I don't know. It's a it's a nice change of pace. So when
You know,
you
it could work. I mean, the most important thing is that the float environment is properly executed. That means the water temperature has to be the right temperature, the air temperature has to be right, the air has to be breathable. They can be awfully humid. Because of the nature of the beast, condensation can be a problem. You shouldn't get dripped on. Cleanliness is of paramount importance. If you want to get people to relax and it's a little cruddy, gross, dirty, it's never going to happen. So that's critically important. And then how people are treated and greeted is, I mean, it's always good business to be kind to people, but in our business, it's the beginning of the therapy, in a sense, begins when you walk in the door. You know, you have to feel cared for, and so we try hard to put people at ease so that they can, you know, so that when they get into the float tank, they're already halfway there.
Right. Yeah. I had a funny story I want to tell you. You said when you walk in, put you at ease, right? And a couple years ago, I think this was prior to COVID, I went to a float session, and just as I pulled it in the parking lot, I got a phone call, and I'm a real estate agent, and one of the deals that I was doing started to fall apart or something like that. And I was like, "Listen, I'm just about to walk into a float. Let me call you. We'll workshop this through together. Give me like 2 hours, and I'll call you back." And I remember I hung up the phone as I like saw the Bodymind Float Center sign, and I was like, okay, here we go. And open up the door. And as I walked in, I was like, oh, what a breath of fresh air. Like, it was just like, I was just like this tense ball of like anxiety. And even when I opened the door, I haven't even stepped in the tank. Open the door, and like, your facility is super clean, welcoming, inviting, with a fantastic front desk person that was super kind and helpful. It just almost like, I don't know how you guys did it, but like when you walk in, it's very, very calming. Was it something that you and Patty like researched together, like to figure out what kind of feel you wanted for it?
Yeah, we
The
definitely.
brand?
Yeah, we did do it. We did work it out all together. I think, you know, sometimes some people claim that a physical space can take on a vibe. I don't know if that's true. I don't know how that could happen, but I know that the way that the way that you're treated definitely affects how you feel. And for you, who had been to the float center many times, there was history, there was
Right.
ritual there.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons, you know, things like uh, music and incense become part of uh, religious rituals, because the habit uh, can help you sort of kick into the frame of mind you're trying to go for.
Right. And how long ago was it when you opened the Rochester facility?
Rochester was first, and that was 2013, September of 2013.
Okay, so September 2013, and then you came to Syracuse. Was it like 2019?
No, we came in,
Sooner.
yeah, 2017.
17?
Yeah, we were shooting for the fall of 2016, but construction issues bedeviled us, and we opened in very early 2017.
What made you want to branch out to Syracuse?
Oh, well, Rochester was doing well, and people were loving it, and we just thought, let's 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 bring it to a neighboring city. And Syracuse uh, and Rochester have some similarities. You know, they're both upstate cities, if you're allowed to call them that. They're reasonably close in size. We thought about Ithaca, but it's a much smaller city. So Syracuse just felt um,
Like the right fit?
like the right, yeah, like we would have an idea of what it was going to be like. Uh,
Do you have any plans to put a third location in somewhere?
nah, too old. I'm
Too
too.
old. You're like, you got my two places. That's all I'm doing right now.
Yeah, it's a lot of work running
Yeah.
float center. So
Are you managing both of them at the same time, or do you have uh like a second in command at each post?
we We used to. We have always had Glenn managing and running the Syracuse Float Center, and he was there. In fact, his agreement to run it initially was part of the decision to go ahead with it. So Glenn runs the show over there, and then more or less I manage the one over here. I mean, there are some kinds of thinking and decisions that are beyond different beyond the day-to-day management that Glenn needs to take care of. But as far as taking care of the physical facility and managing personnel, Glenn and our assistant manager Hannah do a great job for us over in Syracuse. And I was thinking that I'd be there a lot when we planned it, but they're so good that I don't have to make the trip very often at all.
Well, that's a good thing then.
Yeah,
It keeps you. That's always good to have good employees that you don't have to constantly follow up with. That goes
right.
tenfold.
Yeah, those guys are great.
Right,
My
right.
life easy.
Does is your wife also helping you run and manage these facilities?
Yep, she does a lot of the work that looks like this. So if it's payroll related or any website related, that kind of thing,
She does the books.
he does the books exactly. Yeah.
Right, right. Now, are you full time into doing this? Are you juggling it with another full time job?
My wife and I are both classical violinists. We both
Whoa,
played in
really?
Rochester Philharmonic. I played there for many, many years, and I left the orchestra when the Float Center opened. I took a year's leave of absence, and then when things were going okay with the Float Center, I cut that tie. Patty still plays violin for the Rochester Philharmonic, so she's the juggler.
Wow, that is cool. Is that how you guys met? Was violin?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah.
Wow, that is cool. That is very interesting. Was it really nerve wracking when you cut the cord and went to full time float center?
Uh, that particular aspect of it felt reasonably comfortable, um, but it's risky opening a business, and this, of course, is a business that has no precedent in the region.
Yeah, especially 2012, right? I mean, this was not the
Yeah,
scene of float tanks didn't blow up.
yeah, it was. I mean, we sort of caught the beginning of the wave, I think. But yeah, I mean, it's expensive to purchase a float tank, and it's expensive to build a float center. The every room has a shower in it, so you've got to crack the cement and put in your plumbing, and the rooms have to be isolated from one another acoustically, and
Right.
it all costs something. So it was a big investment, and that was scary. And then you sign a lease for 6 years, and you're
And you're saying, God, please just go 6 years.
yeah.
Right? You're like, oh God.
Tell you about leases, you know more about them than I do. So once your name's on the bottom of that paper, you're you're on the hook for that rent. And commercial
Right.
rents are not inexpensive, and the leases are many, many years long. So
Right. When you all the research that you've done up to before you sign that lease, was it uh, done with your wife Patty, and was it with different float tank experts?
well, uh, we had an attorney, of course, and the guys at Float On in the Portland place where I first floated. Float On turns out to be kind of an industry leader. They had a business plan. They have a business plan that you can buy. At the time, it was half baked, and they shared that with me and gave me some advice. And I went out. I bought lunch for about half a dozen people in the community that I thought would maybe have some insights. But in the end, there's an element of tossing putting yourself open to the fates.
Hmm.
You can never be sure what's going to come of it.
Yeah, especially when you're opening a new business, it's always a leap of faith, right? With the people that you've talked to and now have met through networking with different float tank centers and stuff like that, is there somebody that you either like a look up to that's a role model to you, or maybe like a mentor figure to you, somebody that you kind of connect with on a regular basis?
Well, the guys from Float On, um, Graham and Ashkan are the two guys. There were
Cool
four
name.
of them at the time, and those two guys, especially Graham, was helpful to me. And you know, I probably haven't spoken with him for a couple of years because you know you get to stand on your own 2 feet after a while. And um, but uh, but yeah, if there was anyone who was a mentor, it was this Graham Talley from Float On in Portland.
Now that you and your business is established way more, do you have people coming to you looking for advice?
Yeah, you know, right. Long before I could have claimed any sense of expertise in the in the area, if I can even claim it now, people were asking me questions, and I was very happy to do my best to uh, nurture the vibe I described of the float community being you know, sort of a family supportive kind of
Right.
an industry. And I think even as large as it's gotten, there's still a big element of that. You can imagine the kind of conversations that were taking place a little over 2 years ago when the coronavirus came to town.
Right.
You know, we all had a lot of thinking to do about our procedures and how we were going to keep people safe. That was probably the scariest time outside of just opening the business was the beginning of that.
Just because everything was so up in the air.
When I talked to my wife about this at the very beginning when I was proposing the idea of doing it, she said she asked me about my confidence that it could work out. And you know, for all of the conversations I had and the people I spoke to, ultimately it came down to my gut sense that floating is just awesome and people are going to love it. I mean, that was my strong intuition from the moment I floated. She said, so that's what I told her. And she said, is there anything you can think of that could make this business, that could cause this business to fail? I said, a pandemic.
Wow.
Yeah. I was thinking of the AIDS pandemic, which uh, people who have been in the float industry for a while talk about the first wave and the second wave. Floating uh, was invented back in the late 50s by a guy named John Lilly, who was the inspiration for the William Hurt character in Altered States. And then through the 70s, it started taking off. And you're not nearly old enough to remember the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, but people were very scared to use public restrooms, to use swimming pools, and it didn't kill the float industry, but it came pretty close. I think there are maybe 2 or 3 places in the country that were open before AIDS and are still open to this.
Oh, because
Most,
everybody shut down.
a lot of places closed. There weren't tons of them.
Right.
Probably probably I'm just wild guessing here, but I'm pretty sure it'd be under 150, maybe something like that.
Yeah, right. Like nationally, we're
Yeah,
talking.
yeah,
Right.
probably not even 50.
Right. Wow. That's a very interesting. So this gentleman, John Lilly, you said, was
Yeah,
the inventor of the float tank?
yeah.
Interesting. And what was his purpose for inventing it? Do you know?
Yeah, he was not seeking a therapy. He was not looking for something that was going to make you feel good. He was examining the question, what happens to consciousness absent sensory stimulation? And
Hmm.
he was he was onto something because things do change, of course. Um, uh, but so it was just serendipity that this therapeutic modality to start came out of his research. And his first subject was himself. he was floating initially. We float horizontally, of course, uh, but initially he was floating wearing scuba gear, and
Whoa.
I think had weighted his feet down and
Wow.
uh, was floating vertically.
Interesting. Like
Yeah,
a like a vampire.
yeah,
A scuba vampire.
yeah.
That's that's
So
wild.
yeah, so it's become a lot simpler since.
Yeah.
since
Yeah, and only the water's like how high is it? It's like a foot?
yeah, 10 inches.
Right, right.
So
Wow,
yeah,
that's very interesting.
a lot of people who don't swim float.
Right. Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. So it started in the 50s and then it had a little bit of excitement. I mean, I don't think we've ever seen float tanks be as popular as they are today.
Yeah, yeah,
What do you think
it's fun.
contributes to its popularity?
It's great.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, it's just people feel great when, as I was saying, people just want to be happy, and
Right.
voting helps.
Right. And also when we're in an age of technology and idea sharing is easier now than ever. In the 50s, if somebody invented flow tanks, you'd probably get called a lunatic, but you would have no way to get that out to other people for them to try, right? Other
Well,
than a newspaper clipping.
the printing press does predate the float tank, so there were a
Yeah.
few things
Yeah.
going on before you were born. There,
Yeah, right,
Cory.
right. Right. It's really cool to see how I feel like prior like even now, but prior to COVID, like 2018, 2019, I felt like float tanks were like exploding around the United States. They were popping up everywhere. And it's really cool to see because I think more people are realizing the beneficial effects of doing them. Uh what's really cool though is you guys don't even just have float tanks. You guys also have a salt room. What is that? I haven't done that yet.
Yeah, the salt room is offers a therapy called halotherapy. Halo is just Greek for salt, and halotherapy is much older than float therapy. Float therapy was invented back in the 50s, became a thing the public did in the 70s. Halotherapy dates back to the 1830s, and it was more discovered than invented, I would say. There was a Polish physician who treated salt miners and other miners, coal miners. And he found that the salt miners not only didn't have the kinds of problems the coal miners had, but they had, especially good respiratory health. And it turns out that just all the hours in that micro environment of salt caves was keeping their respiratory systems in good shape. And the way that works is um, whether it's in a natural environment like a salt cave or in our salt room where we're artificially putting salt into the air, you're breathing salt in and it's settling where you have congestion in the lungs, the sinuses, the bronchi. And salt has three properties which can be beneficial. It fights inflammation, it tends to kill germs, and salt is hydrophilic. It draws moisture. Um, and so when you've got salt where you have congestion, you're bringing moisture to the congestion, and that helps uh,
Thin it out a little bit.
thin it out and helps keep your lungs and sinuses clear.
How long are you supposed to sit in a room for?
We do 45-minute sessions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And if it's like is it aimed specifically for maybe somebody who is sick with coughing or is it just like overall respiratory health?
Any kind of condition where there's congestion can benefit. Um, we've changed things up with the salt room in light of the pandemic. It used to be a community room. Now, if you go, you're either in there alone or you're in there with your party that you booked with. Um, uh, let's see. And so the kinds of ailments that people come for: allergies, seasonal allergies, asthma, even stuff like cystic fibrosis, chronic or acute sinus problems.
I feel like I would imagine if you are a heavy smoker, this is probably a good idea for you to add to like a weekly routine for you.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll help you clear whatever's whatever's in your lungs. We do we do say that if you're in the contagious phase of an illness, you're not. I mean, we've been saying
You
that
don't
for
want to there.
years, and it's
Right.
become patently, there's no other way now, of course.
Right. Right. Yeah, a lot of the stuff you guys already had in place was like sanitized, great procedures anyways before COVID hit, and then COVID hit, and then you guys had to tweak some things like having one person check in and staggering check-ins
Yeah,
different,
we did
right?
everything we could to keep people apart from each other, which was the opposite of what we envisioned. We envisioned people, uh, and we had it. And we people, the floaters coming out. We're talking to the floaters coming in, and that was a beautiful thing. And we just envisioned it a place where people could hang out. And then the pandemic came, and we did what we could to interrupt that. Um, uh, One of the things that we didn't have to change at all was water hygiene. That the coronavirus is very easy to kill, actually, and our tried and true method of ultraviolet light plus hydrogen peroxide in the water is more than enough to kill coronavirus. But we were very concerned about surfaces, as everyone was initially, and so we began spraying everything down, and we've continued to do that. The place is cleaner than ever, and then air, of course, turns out to be the main means of transmission. And for that, we just cut way back on our capacity. We leave about an hour and a half between floats. We've got air purifiers in every room. We've got exhaust fans in every room, and then just a passage of time. And so I'm happy to say that, to our knowledge, nobody has gotten sick with the coronavirus while they were at the float center.
Yeah, it's a very clean facility for sure. What does that filter look like? Because I'm very impressed that a filter that has to pump and siphon salt water all the time can be as quiet as the ones that you guys have. Does it just suck
Yeah.
it through, put it through? I don't know. I guess explain how that process
Well,
looks like.
it's a kind of pump, not unlike what you'd use for a hot tub or a swimming pool. They're magnetic drive pumps, which means that the salt water doesn't come in contact with the mechanics.
Mm,
And the filtration there, they're spun filters, and we change them out every week. And uh, we run those pumps for half an hour between clients. That's enough for 6 complete exchanges of the water.
oh
So
wow.
that yeah, and then the water is maintained at between 50 and 100 parts per million hydrogen peroxide, which doesn't have uh, the chlorine's downside of being carcinogenic and unpleasant to smell. Everybody's been in an old hotel pool that
Yep.
where you just are overwhelmed by the smell of the chlorine. You wouldn't be some municipalities require their float centers to use chlorine. It's doable, but I consider it to be a less desirable way to go.
Right.
Um, when you open a float center in a municipality, you're working with the health department, and you hope that they're both conscientious and smart and flexible, and can recognize that there's a difference between a float tank and a swimming pool. There are some similarities, but there are also some major differences. And there are horror stories in the float community of inspectors coming in and wanting, like, there's no sign that says no diving.
Yeah. What
You
do
know,
you mean?
oh
Obviously.
yeah, I mean, we have yet to find somebody trying to dive into our 10 inches of float water. So,
Yeah, right.
luckily, uh, Monroe County
Onondaga.
and Onondaga County health departments were they worked with us nicely.
That's good to hear. That's refreshing, especially I can imagine that'd be really funny, them saying, "Don't where's the no diving sign? Where's the no running by pool
Yeah,
sign?" Uh, I'll ask you one last question.
sure.
Um, so for you, where do you see the the float tank center, we'll say in the next 10 years? What do you envision that looking like?
Well, I hope it's just more of the same. I mean, we're really happy with the two therapies we offer. We chose them knowing that they work. There are a lot of fad therapies that come through and come and go, and I don't feel any desire to
Add any other ones?
add anything right now. I mean, if something came up that was really tried and true, and we had confidence in, it's possible that we could add that in Syracuse anyway. There's room there. At our Rochester Center, there is none. So I hope that we just keep offering great floats and great halotherapy sessions, and that more and more people come to see their value.
Yeah, I cannot say enough good things about it. For me, if I should probably just do it once a month, I feel like my overall mental state would be more equilibrium, evened out, I guess you want to
Uh,
say.
Sure.
But I always try to suggest it to as many people as possible because the benefits for me outweigh the anxiety that I get. At least the first time I got anxiety, but now I'm just like, now you're kind of in the flow when you have done it so many times, you kind of are used to it. You're able to slip right into that relaxed meditative state, right?
Well, I appreciate your spreading the word, and I particularly appreciate coming on the Cory cast.
Yeah, this is a really cool because I told you, I'm not blowing smoke up your ass. I've just been a big fan of your facilities for a long time. So for me to learn more about you as a person, a business owner, and more about the facilities and the flow tanks, this was, if anything, an extremely educational piece for myself. So thank you for your time. That was
Thank
great.
you very much, Cory.